Good morning, all our guests. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Yang Bang, and I'm the President and Representative Director of Westlaw Japan and Thomson Reuters Japan. I want to welcome you to the online symposium and session, Reimagining Lawyering in the Global Services Market Post-COVID-19, organized by Thomson Reuters and Westlaw Japan, and co-organized by Advanced Business Law Program of the University of Tokyo. And I'll be the moderator today. Now, I would like to hand it over to Dean Ozawa to give us his opening remarks. Mr. Yutaka Ozawa is the Dean and Professor of Law of the Graduate Schools of Law and Politics of the University of Tokyo. He is a member of the Board of Directors of the Criminal Law Society of Japan, and also a member of the Advisory Committee on the Rules of Criminal Procedure. I would like to extend my greatest appreciation to him and the University of Tokyo for co-organizing the symposium today. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoy your sessions today and take the most fruitful time out of it. Thank you very much. Dean Ozawa, please, the floor is yours.
はい、バン社長、親切なご紹介をありがとうございます。東京大学大学院法学政治学研究科で研究課長を務めております、大沢豊と申します。シンポジウムの開会にあたりまして、一言ご挨拶申し上げます。まず、講師をお務めいただくウィルキンズ先生、8人のパネリストの先生方、そして、多数お集まりの聴衆の皆様、本日は日本の皆様は朝早くから、そしてアメリカの皆様は夜遅くにもかかわらず、このシンポジウムにお集まりいただき、誠にありがとうございます。私たち東京大学大学院法学政治学研究科が、ウエストロージャパン株式会社様と共同でセミナーシンポジウムを開催するのは、今回で3回目となります。過去2回のセミナーでは、本日パネリストとして参加いただいております松尾武之様、そして別所直哉様にそれぞれご講演をいただきました。本日のシンポジウムは、これらのセミナーの成果も踏まえ、アメリカからウィルキンズ先生を講師としてお招きするとともに、多数の先生方によるパネルディスカッションも加えることにより、視野も規模も一段と拡大して実施するものです。このような機会を持つことを可能にしていただいたウエストロージャパン株式会社様には、この場を借りて心より御礼申し上げます。私たちとウエストロージャパン株式会社様との共同でのセミナー、シンポジウムの開催は、私が研究課長、学部長になってまだ間もない、今から2年前、2019年7月に、バン・ヨンソン社長が私の研究課長室をご訪問くださったことに遡ります。そこでテクノロジーの発展が法実務やそれを担う放送、そして放送の養成にあたる大学の教育研究にどのような影響を与えるか、共同で研究したいというお申し出をいただきました。本日、基調講演をお引き受けいただきましたウィルキンズ先生は、私たちがウエストロージャパン株式会社様と共同企画の検討を始めた最初の段階から、ぜひお招きしたい講師としてお名前が挙がっておりました。しかし、新型コロナウイルス感染拡大のもと、国際的な人の行き来が難しくなる中で、昨年は実施を断念し、ようやく今年、こうしてウィルキンズ先生のお話を伺う機会を持つことができました。時差のあるアメリカからご参加いただき、ウィルキンズ先生に心から感謝を申し上げます。本日、 共催として名前を挙げていただいている東京大学先端ビジネスロー国際卓越大学院プログラムは、技術革新が進む中、先端テクノロジーが社会に実装される、社会で実際に用いられることに伴って、ビジネスの領域に急速な変化が生じているということを踏まえ、ビジネスローの領域について、工学、医学等を含む関係諸科学の成果も踏まえつつ、文化系、理科系の枠を超えた総合的な視野から、新たな理論、実践の枠組みを構築できる人材を養成しよう。そのような取り組みに、取り組む教育プログラムです。その方向は、ウィルキンズ先生が示唆されている分野横断的で、外に目を向けた工学教育のあり方と通じるものがあるように思います。本日のご講演とそれに基づくパネルディスカッションは、法律分野の専門家、そして法律を学びつつある学生にとって興味深く有益なものとなると思われますが、東京大学先端ビジネスロー国際卓越大学院プログラムの将来を考える上でも、示唆に富むものになるのではないかと期待しています。最後に繰り返しとなりますが、多数の皆様にご参集いただきましたことに感謝申し上げますとともに、皆様とのこの場での出会いを大切にしていきたいと願っておりますことを申し上げて、私からの挨拶とさせていただきます。
Thank you very much, Dean Ozawa. Thank you very much for your warm remarks. Thank you very much. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to today's our keynote speaker, Professor David Wilkins. Professor Wilkins is the Lester Keysville Professor of Law, Vice Dean of Global Initiative on the Legal Profession, and Faculty Director of the Center on the Legal Profession at Harvard Law School. Today, he has taken time out of his extremely busy schedule to give us a keynote speech and also support us in leading us in our panel discussions today. Thank you very much, Professor, and it is a truly honor to have you with us, although it's not in person, but at least virtually, and we hope to have you again when things get better in Tokyo in person. But we want to really appreciate you being with us and supporting us today. And the title of Professor Wilkins' keynote speech is Reimagining Lawyering in the Global Services Market Post-COVID-19. Professor Wilkins, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Young. It is such an honor to be here. I want to particularly thank Dean Ozawa from the amazing Todai University, one of the greatest universities in the world with one of the greatest law faculties, and his program is really an inspiration for the world in terms of how to think about interdisciplinary learning, which I'll be thinking about later. But I cannot imagine a greater stage to share with the great Dean who just spoke here today. Young, I want to also thank you and your amazing team at Thomson Reuters in Tokyo, but really all around the world. But I want to single out the Tokyo team and particularly Miwa Koda, who has been such a driving force in making this event happen. And I know that there are many, many others who I cannot mention here, but I just want to say I appreciate how hard you have worked to make this event possible. My only regret, quite frankly, is that I can't be in Tokyo with all of you. Tokyo is one of my favorite cities in all of the world, and I've had the great privilege and blessing of traveling to many, many cities around the world, but I don't think there's a city that I would rather go to than Tokyo, and a country that I would rather go to than Japan. And that is not just because of the cherry blossoms, even though I've had the great privilege of being there during cherry blossom season, or even the great restaurants, where I think the greatest food in the world is in Japan. And we know this because Japan is the only country in the world that turned down Michelin for many of its 3-star restaurants because they realized that their food was authentically better than any food in the world. But it's because of the warmth and the spirit of the Japanese people. And I've been going to Japan since 1988. Many of you know my colleague, dear friend, Professor Ali Oldman and his wife, Barbara. They first brought me to Japan. My brother has lived in Japan for many years, practiced law in Japan for many years. I have many friends among the Bengoshi community, as well as the academic community. And again, my only regret is that we are doing this virtually, but I'm delighted and honored to be able to be with all of you here this morning for you, this evening for me. I hope that we will have a very robust discussion about the challenges and the changes that are happening in our world today. For those who are academics, and I know that there are several from Todai and Kyotodai and many of the other great universities around Japan, we will say in a way that I hope the lawyers will appreciate, there's never been a more challenging time to be a lawyer, and never more fascinating time to study the legal profession. But I hope we can all agree there's never been a more exciting time to think about what the possibilities are for our profession. And I hope that's what I'll be able to share with you today. So again, konnichiwa. Thank you so much for inviting me. And let me get started. I have a set of slides which I think have been translated into Japanese. And as I switch to screen sharing mode, I want to thank the brilliant interpreters who are allowing me to present my talk in your language so you can understand. I wish I could do it in Japanese. My brother, if he were here, could do it in Japanese. I am afraid confined to English, but I'm so grateful for the interpreters who allow us to be able to communicate together. As Jung said, the title of my talk is Reimagining Lawyering in the Legal Services Market Post-COVID-19. Now, that's a little bit of an optimistic title because we're not quite post-COVID-19 yet. But I do think it's time for us to imagine post-COVID-19. And even in Japan, where my heart has been breaking for the challenges that your great country has faced and faced so brilliantly in terms of hosting the world, even in your darkest hour. But I think everyone needs to begin to think, what is the world going to look like as we emerge from this global pandemic? So let me start here with a saying that actually I know how many professors in Japan have great and deep ties to China. So you will recognize this old Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times, and we certainly have. We are living in a world in which there are not one, not two, but three interrelated crises: a global public health crisis, a global economic crisis of great complexity, meaning I'll talk a little bit about it's how complex the economic situation is, and an increasingly global calls for sustainability and social justice. And we'll spend a lot of time on this in my remarks. All three of these crises were already going on in many ways before our current situation, but are being turbocharged by the current situation. And they are transforming these kind of three big themes: the market for legal services, and even more importantly, I want to emphasize, the world in which our clients inhabit, because after all, we are a service business. So take globalization and the important rise of the global South and East, particularly the rise of China, which I want to argue makes Japan even more important, not just for the rest of the Western world, but for the world in general. Or the proliferation of law, regulation, and risk, which we'll talk about. Or digital transformation, which has been already transforming everything in the world around us and is coming to the world or the market for legal services. And finally, this is a little academic sounding, but my academic friends will appreciate this. I call it the blurring together of traditional businesses, organizational structures, and ideas. It just means that things that we used to think about as being all separate and distinct are increasingly melding together. Take public and private. All of us are hoping for the vaccines to work, but the vaccines are a public and private partnership. So the US government and other governments put billions of dollars into research, development, but they couldn't have done it without companies like Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson and other great pharmaceutical companies. Or take law and business. When I was a young lawyer, we used to think of law and business as completely separate things. In fact, they were the antithesis of each other. Now, no one would ever say that, because law is, among other things, a very highly globally competitive business. So, in this new world, law is going to be more important than ever. So just consider all the new law that the COVID crisis is either creating or reimagining. So we have all kinds of new laws and programs and redesigned institutions, from government stimulus programs all over the world to contact tracing to online courts. We did a whole 5-hour seminar, which is on our website, and I encourage you to look at it because it was fascinating, about how online courts are not just a temporary phenomenon, but are going to be things that are going to redefine the way in which we think about our judicial system. Or how about all the corporate policies and practices, from employment law, online work, supply chains, data privacy and security, that are being remade by our current situation? Or how about corporate governance? We're going to come back and spend a little time on this. How do companies balance shareholder value on the one hand with stakeholder interests and sustainability? Or how about all the reorganizations that are happening around the world? The sad ones, I would say, from bankruptcy and restructuring, to the strategic ones around acquisitions and M&A, which has been booming. Or how about public-private partnerships? I already mentioned the vaccines of the healthcare industry, or pharmaceuticals. Or how about education? And all of this is not just in the national world, but in the global world, around global compacts and indicators, mandates like the US Global Compact or sustainability audits, or these new laws we are seeing sweeping the world against modern slavery in the supply chain in places like the UK and California. Law is increasingly important around the world to solve the complex problems our world is facing. I just taught my first class at Harvard Law School. I was just telling my friend from Todai in person, but we had 4 members, including the general counsel from Memorial Sloan Kettering, appearing by Zoom with my students in person, talking about how do you determine whether you have a mandatory vaccine mandate for all workers in a healthcare institution. Incredibly complicated problem. And lawyers are in the center of it, but they are not by far the only voices, or even sometimes the most important voices that are heard. And I'll come back to that in a second. Listen, lawyers, law is more important, which means lawyers are more important, but also that means key aspects of how we have practiced law. So we have a lot of talk, and the dean mentioned it in his wonderful remarks, about technology. And maybe one day I'll be a robot, you'll be a robot, we'll be all talking in some digital language. But that day is still a long way away, I hope. And for the foreseeable future, law remains a human capital business, which means law firms, government legal offices, law departments, other public and private organizations have what we call elevator assets, which means they walk in the elevator in the morning, they take the elevator to the 15th or 20th floor with the beautiful views of the Tokyo Tower and the Imperial Palace. They work about 15, 16 hours a day, and then they take the elevator down at night, and you just hope and pray that they'll get back in the elevator the next morning, go upstairs and go to work, because those are your assets. In fact, sometimes we say, why do you lock your doors in your office at night? Your assets are walking around the streets. They're not up there. We don't have physical assets. We have human assets, which means we have to figure out, how are we going to recruit those assets? How are we going to develop them? How are we going to manage them? At the same time, our clients, when it matters, I know there's commodity work, but when it matters, they want lawyers that they can trust when it's important. They can have a relationship with those lawyers. And that's reinforcing a kind of partnering model between lawyers and clients, which I do not believe is going to go away. And here's maybe the most important thing. We have learned in these terrible, challenging times that tradition and stability have never been more important for lawyers, but more importantly for clients, and even more importantly for the societies in which we live. Listen, if we are not going to deregulate the ride-hailing business, meaning Uber and Lyft, we're certainly not going to deregulate the legal business, because law and lawyering are fundamentally linked to important human goods that will never and should never be completely deregulated. And here's the thing we don't think enough about. Our people and our institutions make long-term investments in their future. In my country, it takes 7 years of post-secondary school education to become a lawyer. You switched in Japan. My friend Dan Foote and Todai had a lot to do with this. From an undergraduate model to a hybrid model of undergraduate and postgraduate. It takes a long time and a lot of hard work to become a lawyer. People who make that investment expect, and have a right to expect, that they will have a profession out there for them that they recognize that their investment will be rewarded. That's a big, big thing. And the legal profession has to figure out how to balance the forces of change and the forces of continuity. So I want to talk in this talk today about 3 dimensions of change. One, I want to talk about the most important that lawyers need to never stop focusing on, which is the world of our clients, right? What are the important corporate clients expecting over the next 6 to 24 months? And how will this affect what they want and expect from lawyers? And what challenges and opportunities does that create for us here in the legal profession? Second, competition. How are the forces of change and continuity, reshaping the market for legal services? And how can lawyers compete but also cooperate? And I want to emphasize this point in what I'm going to call the new ecosystem, of professional services. And finally, and most importantly, what about our people? How will the pandemic and all the protests around the world and the looming generational change affect the outlook and the expectations of new lawyers? And what will this mean about what our ability is to recruit, develop, motivate, and monitor people in this new hybrid world of work? My guess is every lawyer, every legal institution is facing this problem now. I was just, as Young knows, in Pebble Beach, where Thomson Reuters is a wonderful conference for managing partners from around the world. Because of COVID, we had half the number of people. We still had 75. And this was the #1 topic of conversation. Okay. And finally, because I'm a law professor and Todai is generously sponsoring this event, what does all this mean for the future of legal education? Okay, let's start with clients. I talk to hundreds of general counsels a year, and I ask them all this question: what keeps you up at night? And even before COVID, they were facing new and unprecedented risks like cybersecurity and data privacy. And in all of these areas around the world, almost none of it clear and none of it consistent. I once had the experience at 18, before the world fell off the cliff, of talking to a bunch of Brazilian general counsels of top companies who wrote a book on the Brazilian legal profession. And I asked them, I said, are you covered by GDPR, the European data privacy regulation? And, one of them scratched their head and he looked at me and said, I don't think so. But you know what? That's not a good answer, because you don't know whether you're covered until you are covered. And this is true with many, many legal regimes around the world, as many of the lawyers on this call know. And yet, here's the key that makes it even harder. Law is only a part. And from the perspective of our clients, not even the most important part about solving these problems. And so clients are there. They problems of which they would like to take the least part as possible, so they could concentrate on the part of you care about, they care about, which is the business part, the public relations part, the consumer facing part. That's what we need to understand as lawyers. that for our clients, law is a part of a broader business, political, strategic, economic problem, okay? And the current crisis is only going to turbocharge this demand. So this is a busy slide, but let me explain it to you. And this is, you can find more information about this on our website. We did a big survey project with EY, the global accounting firm, although, you know, calling them accounting firm is really a misnomer because they are really a multidisciplinary professional service firm. And what we did, as you can see, asked over 2,000 leaders, 17 industries, 22 countries, and 21. All this data comes since January. A big detailed survey to try to, what is the future of the legal function? So not just the law department. We asked general counsels, but we also asked procurement, contracting, business development, a bunch of other places. And we wanted to know what's on your mind, what's going on in your world. But we didn't even start there. Here's where we started. EY has been asking CEOs in something called the Imperative Survey, what are their top priorities? And if you look, CEOs, 66% say they're worried about growth, right? And that they anticipate cost cutting, 53%. But this is the part I want you to focus on. 61% said we want a different approach to risk management because we know we're going to be in a very tough growth environment and we know there's going to be a lot of risk. And so we want a more data-driven approach to risk management. We're willing to pay for it. Now, what does this mean for the general counsels? That means they better reevaluate their cost structure. They better enable the business to grow. They better quantify risk, and they better digitize process. So, what does that mean? Well, here's both the good news and the bad news for lawyers outside of companies. General counsels understand this is a huge deal. And they understand they're facing all these things like new privacy, major regulatory change, investigations. We use Brexit as a, and this shows you that how quickly things get out of date. We use this as a proxy for political change. But here's the thing. If you look at these numbers, only 27% are confident that their legal departments can handle even these kinds of risks. 26% major regulatory changes, 19 investigations, 11% political change. You can see this over here in a broader way. Only 30% they say they have the thing to handle major business changes. And over 11%, only 11% say political changes. This creates a huge opportunity for lawyers to help, but you better be able to help them in the way they want to be helped. So that is where the world was before, but look at where it's going. So 1970, many of you know this famous quote from Milton Friedman. He's a very famous US economist, won the Nobel Prize. He said, the social responsibility of business is to increase profits, period, the end. Now, I don't think anybody fully embraced that idea, but that was kind of the governing idea, maximize shareholder value, okay? But even before COVID, this was being challenged. 2018, many of you know, BlackRock, the world's most important, largest asset manager. I think they have $2 or $3 trillion under management, okay? Declared that it would look beyond the bottom line to invest in businesses that, quote, contribute to society. The Business Roundtable in my country followed up on this by amending its definition of the purpose of a corporation away from the Milton Friedman idea to say that companies owe responsibilities to all their stakeholders, not just their shareholders, their stakeholders, including customers, employees, suppliers, and communities. In January 2020, this was really right before the world fell off the cliff, BlackRock issued a second letter that said it would immediately stop investing in companies that present a, quote, high sustainability risk. Look, by highlighting the structural inequalities in everything from healthcare to employment, COVID will only accelerate this trend. And if you have any doubt, in 2020, the World Economic Forum, Davos, the most capitalist place in the world, called for a, quote, great reset of capitalism in the wake of the pandemic. And since the protests over the murder of George Floyd in my country, many of you have seen this, and other unarmed Black and men and women by the police, it is clear that sustainability must now also include a focus on social and racial justice. And this is not just in the United States. These are global companies putting $50 billion in commitments. The legal profession is going to have to find a way to help companies manage this new complex environment. And these changes are going to have real consequences for our clients. Look, I'm not here to say that all of the talk about sustainability means we're going to solve climate change, right? You can tell me this is window dressing. This is at worst a subterfuge for managerial self-interest. But here's what I tell you. That might be true, but it's still having critical implications for our clients, okay? And all you need to look is what's happening around the world. 2021, April, the Netherlands court said to Shell, you put out a statement, a voluntary statement on sustainability that said you were going to cut your emissions by 45% by 2030. Guess what? We consider that a binding promise. You're now stuck with it. Whether it'll stand up in court, we'll see. But think about the implications. Or how about this? June 2021, just a few months ago, 3 environmentalists, I put the words in quotes because some of them were like former oil company CEOs, but they were put on Exxon's board by major institutional investors like BlackRock and Vanguard and others to push the company to invest more in green energy. And just a couple of weeks ago, the chair of the SEC in my country signaled that it was likely to follow what has been happening in Europe and declare that there are going to be required disclosures around climate change and sustainability. You can say what you want about this, but every company has to deal with it. And companies continue to pour billions of dollars into social justice initiatives. I just went to a meeting this morning on this. Look, I talk to CEOs, GCs, and boards all the time. This is the number one issue they're talking about, okay? And all of it is landing on the desk of the GC. So here's something I hope you paid attention to. Here's what the legal department of the future might look like. Just at the end of June, Microsoft's president and CEO, Brad Smith, many of you know him, publicly reorganized Microsoft's enormous legal department around 3 priorities. 1, earning public trust, and adapting to heightened expectations and expanding global regulation. 2, building deep technology solutions that drive satisfaction, competitiveness, and success. And 3, using technology to help address the world's challenges. And his direct reports reflect these priorities. Here's who's reporting to him: privacy and regulatory affairs, corporate security and trust, customer experience and trust, environmental sustainability, Microsoft philanthropies, technology, and social responsibility. Just think for a minute how little these priorities and categories have to do with the way lawyers typically define the world and how our law firms are organized. And Smith himself is just a prototype of a new and elevated role of GCs that reflect these concerns. We've been tracking this at the Center on the Legal Profession all over the world. Google, Kent Walker, has been promoted to Senior Vice President for Global Affairs. Spotify, Horacio Gutierrez, has been promoted to Chief Legal Officer and Head of Global Strategy. And even at a kind of old industrial company, Ford, Stephen Crowley has been promoted to both General Counsel and Chief Policy Officer. These and new and more important general counsels are in turn reshaping the market for legal services. And that is shaping competition. So here's the second thing I want to talk about. Increasingly sophisticated clients have more access to information and who are demanding more transparency from us. And they're forcing efficient unbundling and repackaging of legal services and a move towards value billing. And they're reducing their demand quite intentionally for what my friend Richard Susskind calls bespoke legal services, meaning legal services which are handcrafted one at a time, okay? Instead, they're saying, no, that's not just a one-off transaction or a one-off litigation. We have these all the time. We want a systemic solution. And that's putting pressure on all of our traditional models. Our traditional business model, which, let's be honest, is driven by hourly billing, driven by leverage. The more lawyers billing, the more hours, the more money we make. They're putting pressure on this. Or how about our human capital model? Only lawyers in traditional law firms can provide legal services. Or how about our knowledge management model? Go to the library or go talk to the senior sensei who knows the answer. Or how about this, even closer to home for me and my friend the dean? What about our educational model, which is years and years of formal education, learning how to think like an 18th century common law, or here in Japan, civil law lawyer? All of these, I want to suggest, are under pressure, okay? Which is producing a whole new set of players. So according to the latest estimates, again by my friends at Thomson Reuters, alternative legal services are a $14 billion industry. Just let that sink in. That is huge. And calling them alternative misperceives both the market and their threat. That is, rather than traditional law firms and alternative providers, I think what we now need to understand is we have a different ecosystem, okay, which increasingly consists of law firms from around the world, global multidisciplinary professional service firms, of which the big four accounting networks are only the most important part, established startup and legal tech companies, legal talent platforms, top legal process outsourcers, in-house legal departments, all of which are both competing in and helping to reshape the ecosystem boundary norms and practices. That's a different world, okay? And all of these competitors are increasingly turning to some form of what I'm going to call an integrated solutions model, not just legal services, but embedding law into a wider business solution, right? And if you look at what our clients are doing, this is back to the data that we collected with EY. Just read this statistic. Law departments who use alternative legal suppliers extensively are 8 times more likely to want to expand their use. And that's already 69% of people who we survey. So what are law firms doing? They're trying to create chief innovation officers to try to show clients they're serious about driving change. Many of them are going further by creating ancillary businesses and practices, often expressly designed to compete with the new alternative providers and the Big Four in particular. DLA launched Noble Street Consultancy 2015. Hogan Lovells launches a consulting arm after a PwC hire. Mintner Ellison in Australia snagged top EY executive Annette Kimmett for a new CEO role. McDermott started Farragut Square Corp. White and Case hired Deloitte management consulting leader, reporting directly to the chairman. Reed Smith became the first international law firm to gain alternative business structure status in the UK. Dentons has been chasing the Big Four all around the world. This is a little chart from another article we did in the practice, some other research in which we looked at revenue per lawyer and law firm number of countries represented by the Global 100. And most of the firms chasing these strategies are in this sector, which are big global firms that don't have high profitability, that know they are susceptible to the Big Four. Most Japanese firms are not in this category. But here's a different thing. Look at the firms here. These are the top law firms in the world. High revenue per lawyer, not many offices around the world. And yet many of them are also looking to this strategy. Why? Because they think it's what their clients want. We're building consulting practices that complement our legal practices. This is from an interview we did. Because we can help the clients, not due to the Big Four competition pressures. These are areas where our client starts with a lawyer, not a consultant. We will build complementary competencies and work with the Big Four when necessary. Look at Paul Hastings, just launched a lifestyle consulting practice, or Robeson Gray Insight Lab, full service consulting offering. March 21, Business Insider said that hundreds of millions of dollars are being put into startups by very top firms because they think innovation is an important competitive strategy. And you can see venture capitalists are going along, investing $100 million in contract analytic firm Ironclad, $200 million in e-discovery review. And all of these strategies are pushing innovation. So 73%, this is a different survey done by Thomson Reuters unit Acritas, report that they've seen no innovation in their primary law firms. That's not true, but that's how general counsels perceive it, okay? And therefore, innovation can be a key differentiator. But creating a culture of innovation is hard because most of the managing partners understand the disruption in the legal market I've been talking about. But many of their top partners do not. They don't have the same idea about the need for change. And this is particularly true of senior influential partners. And as a result, firms struggle to align their innovation strategy with their existing strategy. But without bringing your people along, you cannot make change. So I'm going to end by talking about people, okay? And here's what I want to say. We talked a lot about everything that happened in 2020, but here's what we didn't talk about. Gen Zs, who are the generation behind millennials, graduated from university, including in Japan, in 2020. And millennials and Gen Zs make up over 30% of the workforce, and they will be more than 50% of the workforce by the end of the decade. And we know this about them. One, they are born digital, meaning they're so much more familiar with technology than us old people ever will. And at the same time, they are increasingly seeking meaning and purpose in their lives. And I believe that the pandemic and the protests are only going to turbocharge these dual commitments. And this is especially important for us as lawyers, because we depend on recruiting people to our profession because we tell them that they have a legitimate opportunity to engage in a public purpose, okay? My mother was born in the Great Depression, and she never forgot. And I believe that these young kids will never forget the experience of this global pandemic. But I also believe, here's the optimistic thing, that like the greatest generation, which is what we call the World War II and the Great Depression generation, the generation in your company country who rebuilt Japan after the war, that is the greatest generation. And I believe this generation wants to do great things, but we're going to have to pay more attention to them if we're going to want to recruit and keep them. So here's what we know. Well-functioning teams must be excellent on three interconnected dimensions. One, they must be excellent at providing services to clients. That's a given. But they must also support every team member's well-being and development. And they must create a learning environment that facilitates continuous improvement. Here's what we also know. In high-stakes environment, there's a constant danger that the first one, service to clients, is going to overwhelm the second two. Yet when team members don't believe in the second two, team performance suffers, and that is inevitably because people leave. And that's particularly true for the most vulnerable team members. So we have to make time and attention to pay attention to these dynamics. So let me leave you with 5 things I want you to think about in this post-COVID-19 world. 2 are familiar. How are we going to manage workflow? Look, we're going to have what economists are calling a K-shaped recovery, where some things are going to take off and some things are going to face substantial headwinds. That means in our own organizations, in our own law firms, right? How do we ensure that the rich don't get richer, meaning the ones that are taking off don't just do better, and the poor get poorer? And by the way, that's not just a problem for the rich. For the poor, because the rich will burn out and they will leave. As a friend of mine said when I said, how's working from home? She said, I'm not working from home. I'm sleeping at work. And that's what your best people are facing. Second, how do you measure performance? How do you look at things like initiative, judgment, collaboration, presence in a hybrid online environment? But here's the thing we need to ask. How were we measuring these things before? And were we measuring the right things, right? How can we use the current moment to do a better job? Here are 2 we don't think about much at all. How do we monitor what are the developments that are happening in the real world? right? We're just now struggling to keep our heads above water. But this crisis is only going to turbocharge the changes that are happening all around us. And to stay ahead of these changes, lawyers must monitor these developments closely. But how do you keep your focus on everything that's going on out there? And how do you keep your team doing the same? We need to think about this. Or how about this? We have to figure out how to motivate change. You know, there's an old saying, never let a good crisis go to waste, meaning crisis is sometimes the best time to change when circumstances force us to change. We sometimes call this the burning platform. But we also know this is when people are the most resistant to change. So here's the hardest part. How do we maintain and evolve our culture? No change, I promise you, no change is going to happen unless people trust that those pushing change have their best interests at heart. This means that culture is more important than ever, but it's never been harder to identify and maintain. Yet people have never needed it more. It's only by keeping a constant focus on these 5 critical areas can law firms, legal departments, government law offices, even law schools prepare for the future certain to come. But the leaders of these organizations have to demand that we in law schools help prepare students for this new world. So here's just a few thoughts for my law school friends, okay? Law schools typically teach law from the perspective of the judge or the policymaker. But most of our students, even in Japan, are going to become begoshi, at least initially. And in my country, the overwhelming majority of my students. Law schools have an ethical obligation to study and teach about the legal profession as rigorously as we teach about law, legislatures, and courts. This doesn't mean just adopting a purely professional perspective, because law professors also have a duty to the public that has legitimate reasons for questioning what lawyers say. But it can't be purely external either. Law professors are a core part of the legal profession, even for those of you who may not have a law degree. So I leave you with this. If the legal profession hopes to continue to attract talented women and men, it must demonstrate that legal work provides meaning and sustainable integration of the professional and the personal. And this means that great educational institutions like Harvard, like the University of Tokyo, and the other great law schools in Japan must not only teach law students the core competencies of their own discipline, meaning statutes and legal interpretation and case law and all the rest, but they also must teach what my colleague Ben Heineman and Bill Lee wrote in I hope, an important piece called Lawyers and Professionals and as Citizens. They must teach the complementary competencies, things like financial literacy, a basic understanding of information technology, cross-cultural fluency that allow them to contribute to solving the multiplicity of urgent problems at the intersection of law, business, technology, public policy, and morality. So, whether or not the world is being remade, it's clear that legal education must be. And in the coming days, legal education must be more multidisciplinary, interactive, and outward-facing. And it must be based on a strong empirical foundation and embedded in a process of lifelong learning and engagement. And if all this sounds like a shameless plug for the work we do at the Harvard Law School Center on the Legal Profession, it is. But I urge you to think about it. Thank you so much. I thank you so much for your time and attention, and I look forward to our panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Wilkins. That was very inspiring, and very. I think it didn't feel like it was that long. But it went very quickly. So thank you very much for this inspiring and insightful speech. And I think it's time for us. I know that people are waiting for to move on to the next session, panel discussion. But I think it's a good time for us to take a nice break. So everybody will take a 12-minute break and come back at 10:15 our time in Japan. Thank you very much, Professor Wilkins. And thank you very much, everybody in the audience, for listening. So we'll be back in 12 minutes. Thank you.